A young woman collapses in a hospital, whispering the words, "I'm not clean anymore." But when the billionaire beside her pulls the cloth from her face, he goes pale. The scars, the bruises, everything he thought he'd fixed with his money are tied to him. Once she worked for him. Then one lie destroyed her name and her life. Now she's back, broken, in a world that forgot her. But there's something he doesn't know. The tragedy that shattered her happened inside his charity, under his name. As guilt, faith, and buried secrets collide, two broken souls are forced to face the truth about forgiveness, redemption, and what it really means to be clean. Can a man who built empires rebuild a soul he helped break? Or will the truth destroy them both before grace can find them? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The fluorescent lights of Grady Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the rain-slicked floor of the emergency room entrance. Outside, the Atlanta sky wept, sending sheets of cold rain against the glass doors. It was 11:15 at night when Sienna Washington stumbled through those doors, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the polished linoleum. Her dark curls hung in wet tangles around her face, and her dress, once a cheerful yellow, was now torn and muddied. The few people in the waiting room looked up, then quickly averted their eyes from her disheveled appearance. But Nurse Olivia Ramos, who had seen every kind of human suffering in her 15 years at Grady, moved toward her without hesitation. "Miss, do you need help?" Nurse Olivia's voice was gentle but firm as she approached Sienna, noting the way the young woman's arms wrapped protectively around herself. Sienna's lips trembled as she tried to speak. Her eyes, usually bright with the joy that had once made her gospel performances so captivating, were now dulled with fear and exhaustion. She began, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. At that moment, Dawson Cross stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. He had just finished checking on a patient whose medical bills his foundation was covering, another nameless face in the sea of people he helped from a distance. His perfectly tailored suit and commanding presence marked him as someone who didn't belong in this late-night emergency room scene. He was halfway to the exit when the commotion caught his attention. Something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way Sienna swayed on her feet, or maybe it was something deeper, a half-remembered fragment of recognition that tugged at his memory. "Mom, I need to get some information from you," Nurse Olivia was saying, already signaling for a wheelchair. "Can you tell me your name?" Sienna's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Sienna Washington." The name fell from her lips just as her knees buckled. Dawson moved without thinking, crossing the space in 4 long strides. He reached her just as she began to collapse, helping Nurse Olivia ease her into the newly arrived wheelchair. Up close, he could see the bruises forming on her arms, the scratch marks on her neck. "I need a gurney here!" Nurse Olivia called out, her practiced calm masking the urgency in her voice. She pressed her fingers to Sienna's wrist, checking her pulse. Dawson knelt beside the wheelchair, his expensive trousers soaking up water from the floor. Something about Sienna's face nagged at him. Had he seen her before? In a meeting? At one of his foundation's events? The feeling of recognition was like an itch he couldn't scratch. As the gurney arrived and they began to transfer her, Sienna's eyes fluttered open briefly. Her gaze met Dawson's, and in that moment, something passed between them. A connection he couldn't explain. Her lips moved, forming words that seemed to take all her remaining strength. "I'm not clean anymore," she whispered, the words carrying a weight that seemed to fill the sterile hospital air. The medical team began wheeling her away, Nurse Olivia keeping pace beside the gurney. Dawson found himself following, drawn by both concern and that persistent sense that he should know who this woman was. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting, but for once he ignored it. The fluorescent lights tracked their progress down the long hallway, the wheels of the gurney squeaking against the floor. Nurse Olivia shot him a questioning look as he continued to follow, but she didn't object to his presence. Perhaps she recognized him. His face had been in enough local papers and charity newsletters. "BP's low," one of the medical technicians reported as they rolled through a set of double doors. "We need to get her stabilized." Dawson watched as they disappeared into a treatment room, leaving him standing in the hallway. He could see Nurse Olivia through the window, efficiently helping to transfer Sienna to an examination bed. The nurse's movements were practiced but gentle, her hands steady as she began to assess Sienna's injuries. He stood there longer than he should have, watching the medical team work. His driver would be waiting outside in the rain, and his phone had buzzed 3 more times, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment mattered, that somehow this rain-soaked woman was connected to him in a way he needed to understand. Through the window, he saw Sienna's hand fall limply to her side as the medical team worked around her. Her words echoed in his mind. "I'm not clean anymore." The raw pain in her voice had cut through all his carefully constructed barriers, reaching something in him he thought he'd buried years ago, after his wife's death. Finally, Nurse Olivia emerged from the room, pulling off her latex gloves. She gave him an appraising look, her dark eyes sharp with assessment. "Mr. Cross," she said, confirming that she did indeed recognize him. "She's stable, but she needs rest and privacy." The last word carried a gentle but firm suggestion that it was time for him to leave. "Of course," he said, straightening his suit jacket in a reflexive gesture. "But I'd appreciate it if you could keep me informed of her condition. My foundation might be able to help with any expenses." Nurse Olivia's expression softened slightly. "That's kind of you, Mr. Cross. But right now, what she needs most is time to heal." Dawson nodded, taking one last look through the window at Sienna's still form. The rain continued to drum against the hospital windows, creating a somber rhythm that matched his troubled thoughts. As he turned to leave, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant. "Need background check on Sienna Washington. Priority." He walked back through the quiet hospital corridors, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The late-night cleaning crew was at work, their machines humming as they polished the floors, erasing the wet footprints Sienna had left behind. But Dawson knew that some marks couldn't be so easily wiped away. Some stains, some memories, some connections persisted, demanding to be acknowledged. Outside, his driver held an umbrella over him as he slid into the back seat of his black luxury sedan. As they pulled away from the hospital, Dawson watched raindrops race down his window, each one carrying the reflection of the city lights. Somewhere in his mind, a memory was trying to surface, a connection to Sienna Washington that he couldn't quite grasp. But one thing was certain. This rain-soaked night had changed something, set something in motion that he couldn't yet understand. The car merged into the late-night traffic, its headlights cutting through the rain. Inside, Dawson sat in thoughtful silence, his usually ordered mind unsettled by the evening's events. The image of Sienna's haunted eyes stayed with him, along with her whispered words that seemed to carry the weight of a story he needed to hear. The first hints of dawn crept through Atlanta's rain-streaked windows, painting the hospital room in soft grays and blues. The steady beeping of monitors created a rhythm that matched Sienna's pulse, pulling her slowly back to consciousness. Her eyelids felt heavy, like they were weighed down with sand, but she forced them open. The antiseptic smell hit her first, that unmistakable hospital scent that made her stomach turn. Then came awareness of the dull ache that seemed to radiate through every inch of her body. The thin hospital gown felt rough against her bruised skin, and the IV in her arm created an uncomfortable pinch. Through the fog of pain medication, Sienna's eyes drifted to the large window that separated her room from the hallway. A tall figure stood there, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the sterile hospital environment. Even in the dim light, she recognized him immediately, Dawson Cross, the man whose charitable foundation had once given her a chance, then taken it all away. Her heart monitor betrayed her panic, its steady beeping turning erratic. 2 years of buried memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. The false accusations, the public shame, the devastating loss of everything she'd worked for. Her trembling hands moved to the IV in her arm, fingers fumbling to pull it free. The movement must have caught his attention because Dawson turned and their eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked like shock. He stepped into the room, his normally commanding presence somehow softer in the grey morning light. "Miss Washington?" he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she couldn't quite interpret. "I didn't realize. You used to sing at our foundation events." Sienna's fingers stilled on the IV, but her heart continued its frantic rhythm. She remembered those events, remembered singing gospel songs that made his late wife smile, remembered feeling like she was finally using her gift for something meaningful, before it all fell apart. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I can't, I shouldn't be here." Dawson moved closer, and she could see the moment he truly took in her condition. His controlled expression cracked slightly as he noticed her split lip, the bruises blooming on her arms, the way she curled into herself like a wounded animal. Without a word, he shrugged off his expensive wool coat and draped it gently around her shoulders. The unexpected kindness of the gesture nearly undid her. The coat was warm from his body heat, and it smelled of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. It should have made her feel safer, but instead, it made her feel small and vulnerable. Tears she'd been holding back began to fall. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. He reached for a clean hospital cloth on the bedside table, dampening it with water from a pitcher. When he brought it to her face to wipe away her tears, it came away stained with dried blood she hadn't even realized was there. As he pulled back the cloth, his eyes fell to her arms. The marks there, some fresh, some older, told a story that made the color drain from his face. Finger-shaped bruises, defensive wounds, evidence of a struggle that no one should have to endure. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of Dr. Martinez, who carried a tablet and a concerned expression. "Ms. Washington," she said, her tone professional but kind, "I need to discuss your injuries and treatment plan." The doctor's eyes flickered to Dawson, silently questioning his presence, but Sienna found herself nodding. She couldn't explain why, but something in her needed him to hear this, needed him to know. "You were brought in with multiple contusions, a mild concussion, and signs of physical assault." Dr. Martinez began carefully. "The injuries appear to have occurred at or near the First Light Church shelter on Peachtree Street. Can you tell us what happened?" Sienna's fingers clutched Dawson's coat tighter around herself. "I've been volunteering there," she managed to say. "Singing for the evening services, helping serve meals. Last night, after everyone left." Her voice broke, and she couldn't continue. Dawson had gone very still. "First Light Church shelter?" he repeated, his voice strained. "That's one of our foundation's primary funding recipients." The weight of this revelation seemed to crush him. He sank into the chair beside her bed, running a hand over his face. The man who always seemed so in control now looked shaken to his core. "I'm not clean anymore," Sienna whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. They were different this time, not just about what had happened last night, but about everything. About feeling stained by false accusations, by lost dreams, by violence she didn't deserve. Dr. Martinez stepped closer, her voice firm but compassionate. Ms. Washington, what happened to you is not your fault. You need time to heal, both physically and emotionally. We have counselors who can help. But Sienna had curled further into herself, pulling Dawson's coat around her like armor. The morning light had grown stronger now, highlighting the stark white of the hospital walls and the dark circles under her eyes. The monitor continued its steady beeping, marking time in a world that had shifted irreversibly for both her and the man sitting beside her bed. Through her tears, she could see Dawson's hands gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. The guilt that radiated from him was almost palpable. Guilt for not knowing what was happening in his own foundation's shelter. Guilt for the past accusations that had sent her life spiraling. Guilt for the broken woman before him who had once filled his wife's final days with song. The room fell into silence except for the persistent beep of monitors and Sienna's quiet sobs. Outside, Atlanta was waking up to a new day, but inside this hospital room, time seemed suspended in a moment of shared pain and recognition, a moment that would change both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The morning sun struggled through Atlanta's lingering clouds as Dawson paced the hospital corridor. He hadn't slept, his mind replaying the previous night's revelations like a torturous film reel. His normally pristine suit was wrinkled from spending the night in the waiting room chair, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Mr. Cross?" A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I'm Sarah Chen, the hospital social worker assigned to Ms. Washington's case." Dawson turned to face her, straightening his posture automatically. "How is she doing?" Sarah's expression was professionally concerned as she consulted her tablet. "Physically, she's stable enough for release today. However," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "we have some concerns about her discharge plan. Ms. Washington has no current address on file. Her previous lease ended 2 months ago." "What about family? Friends?" Dawson asked, though he already suspected the answer. "She's been reluctant to provide emergency contacts." Sarah's voice softened. "From what we've pieced together, she's been staying temporarily with various church members, but her position at First Light Church ended after—" She trailed off, checking her notes again. "After the incident." Dawson's jaw tightened. The incident, a sterile word for what had happened to her. "And her employment history?" Sarah shook her head. "There's a troubling pattern. Every job application she's submitted in the past 2 years has been rejected. It seems her name has been—" She paused again, looking uncomfortable. "Blacklisted." Dawson finished, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. He knew exactly why. The theft accusation from his own foundation had spread through Atlanta's tight-knit charitable community like wildfire. An accusation he had never questioned, too consumed with his own grief over his wife's recent passing to look deeper. "Mr. Cross, without stable housing and support, her recovery could be compromised," Sarah said, "both physically and emotionally." Dawson rubbed his temple, an idea forming. "I have a property," he said slowly. "A guest cottage on my lake estate, about 40 minutes outside the city. It's private, secure, fully furnished." Sarah's professional mask slipped slightly, showing surprise. "That's very generous, but Ms. Washington would need to agree, and given your history—" "I know." Dawson straightened his tie, a nervous habit. "Let me speak with her." The walk to Sienna's room felt longer than it had the night before. Through the window he could see her sitting up in bed, staring out at the clearing sky. She looked small against the white hospital sheets, but there was still a dignity in her posture that touched him. He knocked softly before entering. Sienna turned, and he saw her body tense slightly, a reaction that made his guilt deepen. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Her voice was quiet but steady. "The doctor says I can leave today." Dawson moved closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I've been speaking with the social worker. She mentioned you might need a place to stay." Sienna's face closed off immediately. "I'll figure something out. I don't need your pity, Mr. Cross." "It's not pity," he said quickly, then paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's atonement, maybe. I've been carrying something for 2 years that I need to say." He met her eyes directly. "I never questioned the accusation against you, never looked into it personally. I was grieving Claire, drowning in foundation paperwork, and I just accepted what I was told. That was wrong of me." The honesty in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "I have a guest cottage," he continued carefully, "on my lake property outside the city. It's private, peaceful, just trees and water and quiet. You could stay there, recover properly. No strings attached." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because it's the right thing to do, because you deserve a safe place to heal, and because maybe—" He swallowed hard. "Maybe we both need a chance at redemption." Sienna looked back out of the window, where the last of the storm clouds were breaking up. Several long moments passed before she spoke again. "Where is this cottage?" By early afternoon, Dawson was driving his Mercedes SUV along the winding road that led to his lake estate. Sienna sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding a small bag containing the few belongings the hospital had salvaged. The standard-issue sweats they'd given her seemed to swallow her frame. As they curved around the last bend, the lake came into view, a vast expanse of blue water surrounded by towering pine trees. Sienna's breath caught audibly at the sight. The cottage sat slightly apart from the main house, a charming structure of stone and wood with a wraparound porch. Dawson parked in front and came around to open Sienna's door, careful not to crowd her as she stepped out. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine needles and fresh water. For the first time since he'd seen her in the hospital, some of the tension seemed to leave Sienna's shoulders as she breathed in deeply. "The cottage has everything you might need," Dawson explained as he led her to the door. "Full kitchen, laundry, internet. The nearest neighbor is 1/2 mile away, but there's a security system, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, lives in the main house if you need anything." He unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing Sienna to enter first. The interior was cozy but elegant, comfortable furniture in soft blues and greens, large windows overlooking the lake, a stone fireplace ready with wood. Sienna moved slowly through the space, her fingers trailing along a smooth wooden table. She paused at the window, looking out at the peaceful water. "You can stay as long as you need," Dawson said quietly. "There's no pressure, no expectations. Just peace and quiet to heal." She turned to face him, and for a moment he saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows caught the tears threatening to spill over. "Thank you," she whispered, and in those 2 words, Dawson heard both gratitude and uncertainty. The voice of someone who had learned the hard way that kindness often came with hidden costs. But as he watched her gaze return to the calm lake waters, he saw the smallest hint of relaxation in her posture, a barely perceptible lowering of the guards she'd built so high. Standing there in the warm light of the cottage, surrounded by the scent of pine and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It felt like perhaps they had both taken the first step on a path toward something like healing. The lake house settled into a quiet rhythm over the next 48 hours. Sienna spent most of her time by the cottage windows, watching the water ripple and change colors as the sun traced its path across the sky. Sometimes she would stand on the porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan Mrs. Rodriguez had kindly provided, letting the pine-scented breeze wash over her. In the main house, Dawson maintained a respectful distance while juggling business calls. His voice occasionally carried across the grounds as he paced the deck, phone pressed to his ear. Though he kept glancing towards the cottage, he resisted the urge to intrude on Sienna's solitude. "The Singapore deal needs restructuring," he told his executive team during one call, his eyes fixed on the cottage's chimney, where a thin trail of smoke indicated Sienna had lit the fireplace. "Push the meeting back 2 weeks. I'm handling some personal matters." The late afternoon sun was sinking toward the tree line when Dawson retreated to his study. He loosened his tie and sank into the leather chair behind his desk, exhausted from a day of negotiations. His fingers traced the smooth edge of his phone, hovering over the voicemail icon. He had listened to Caroline's old messages countless times since her passing, but tonight something compelled him to scroll to one particular recording from 2 years ago. His throat tightened as he pressed play. "Dawson, honey." Caroline's warm voice filled the room, slightly scratchy through the phone's speaker, but still achingly familiar. "I wish you could have been at the foundation event today. That young woman, Sienna Washington, her voice Dawson. When she sang Amazing Grace, I saw hardened businessmen wiping their eyes. She has such a gift for touching hearts." Dawson closed his eyes, remembering. Caroline had been so excited about discovering Sienna's talent. The message continued. "I know you're worried about me, about the Foundation's future, but promise me something, Dawson. Promise me you'll help people like her find their light. The world needs more voices that remind us of grace." The recording ended with a soft, "I love you," and Dawson's office fell silent except for his uneven breathing. He pressed his palms against his eyes, Caroline's words echoing in his mind. How spectacularly he had failed to keep that promise. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Dawson stood in his kitchen, carefully preparing 2 cups of tea. He had noticed Sienna favoring chamomile during her hospital stay, so he selected that blend, adding a touch of honey to both cups. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he walked the path to the cottage. He hesitated before knocking, wondering if this was an intrusion. But Caroline's voice in his memory gave him courage. "Come in." Sienna's soft voice answered his knock. She was curled in, the window seat, a thick blanket around her shoulders. The morning light caught the healing scratches on her face, but some of the haunted look had left her eyes. "I brought tea," Dawson said, setting 1 cup on the small table beside her. "Chamomile. I noticed you liked it at the hospital." Surprise flickered across her face. "You noticed that?" "I notice more than people think." He settled into an armchair, leaving comfortable space between them. "I know I'm not always good at showing it, but I do see things." Sienna wrapped her hands around the warm cup, inhaling the steam. "Thank you. I want you to know," Dawson continued carefully, "that if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here to listen. No judgments, no expectations, just a willing ear." She studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, broken only by birdsong from outside. "I used to love singing at Caroline's events," Sienna finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't about performing. It was about sharing something holy. When I sang, I could feel God's presence so strongly. It made me believe I had a purpose." Dawson's hands tightened around his cup. Caroline loved your singing. She said you touched people's hearts. She was kind to me. Sienna's eyes grew distant. Even when everything fell apart, even when people were saying such terrible things about me, I held on to my faith. I kept thinking, God knows the truth. But then, her voice cracked. Then the doors just kept closing. No one would hire me. The church, they asked me to step down from the choir. My reputation was ruined, and I started wondering if maybe God had turned away too. I'm so sorry, Dawson said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. I should have investigated the accusations myself. I was drowning in my own grief after Caroline passed. I let other people make decisions I should have made. That's no excuse, but it wasn't your fault. Sienna interrupted softly. We all carry guilt for things we couldn't control. She met his eyes directly for the first time. I see it in you too. That weight. The feeling that you should have done something different, been something more. Dawson's breath caught. In that moment of recognition, one wounded soul seeing another, the carefully maintained distance between them seemed to shrink. Does it ever get easier? He asked, surprising himself with the vulnerability in his voice. I don't know, Sienna admitted. But maybe we're not supposed to carry it alone. They sat in companionable silence after that, sipping tea and watching the morning light dance across the lake. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of understanding. Two broken people, recognizing in each other the same desperate need for grace. The moment stretched, fragile but genuine, as the sun climbed higher and their tea grew cold. Neither seemed willing to break the peaceful quiet that had settled over them, as if they both instinctively knew that sometimes the most important connections happen in the spaces between words. Saturday morning brought a crisp autumn breeze across the lake. Sienna sat on the cottage's small couch, absently scrolling through her phone when it buzzed with an incoming message. Her friend Maya from the shelter had texted, "Emergency. The shelter is shutting down. They're saying something about money problems. Everyone has to be out by Monday. Call me!" Sienna's hands trembled as she dialed Maya's number. The phone rang 3 times before her friend's worried voice came through. "Sienna, it's crazy here," Maya said, her voice tight with stress. "They showed up this morning with official papers, something about financial irregularities. Nobody's telling us anything real." "What about the residents?" Sienna asked, her heart aching for the women she'd worked with. "Where will they go?" "That's just it. They're being transferred to other shelters across the city." "But Sienna," Maya lowered her voice, "something feels wrong. Remember how you tried to report what happened to you? The paperwork's gone missing, all of it. And now this sudden shutdown?" Sienna's stomach knotted. "I'll call you back," she whispered, ending the call. She paced the cottage floor, memories of that terrible night flooding back. The shelter had been her sanctuary, a place where she thought she could rebuild her life after losing everything. Now it too was being taken away. Without thinking, she found herself walking up the gravel path to the main house. She needed answers, and only one person could provide them. Dawson was in his home office when she knocked. "Sienna." He looked up from his laptop, concerned. "What's wrong?" "The shelter is closing," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Did you know?" His expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What? No, that's impossible. My foundation is their primary donor." He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let me check something." Sienna watched as his face grew increasingly pale. "What is it?" "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, opening file after file. "These numbers, they don't add up. The Foundation's quarterly reports show regular payments, but the shelter's receiving accounts—" He sat back, running a hand through his hair. Someone's been diverting the funds. There's more, Sienna said quietly. The documentation about my attack, it's disappeared. Dawson's head snapped up. What? All the paperwork, the incident reports, everything. Gone. She wrapped her arms around herself. Just like the evidence that would have cleared me of theft 2 years ago. Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes. The board members, he said, they're covering something up, using my name, my foundation. His hands clenched into fists. They're burying what happened to you to protect the foundation's reputation, to protect me. Sienna felt a strange calm settle over her. All this time, I thought I was alone in my disgrace, but it was bigger than me, wasn't it? How many other women have they silenced? I'll fix this, Dawson said, standing abruptly. I'll launch an investigation, replace the board, whatever it takes. No, Sienna said softly. This isn't something you can fix with money or power. She met his gaze steadily. The truth needs to come out. All of it. Even if it destroys your foundation's reputation. Even if it destroys you. Sienna, I've lived with shame for 2 years, Dawson. Shame that wasn't mine to carry. Her voice grew stronger. I won't let them bury this. Those women at the shelter, they deserve better. I deserve better. She turned and walked out, leaving him standing in his office. The sun was setting as she made her way back to the cottage, painting the lake in shades of orange and gold. On the small porch, Sienna watched the moon rise, a pale ghost in the darkening sky. For the first time in 2 years, she felt the stirring of something like hope. Or maybe it was just the courage to face whatever came next. She closed her eyes, words rising from some deep, long-buried place in her heart. God, she whispered, if you're real, show me the truth. All of it, even if it hurts, even if it costs me everything. I need to know. The evening breeze carried her prayer across the quiet lake, rippling the water like gentle fingers across a glass sheet. Stars began to appear, one by one, in the deepening twilight, as Sienna stood witness to her own resurrection. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Probably Maya with more news, but she let it ring. For now, this moment of clarity was enough. The truth would come, in its own time, with its own consequences, and for the first time in years, Sienna was ready to face it. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light across the water. Sienna remained on the porch, her prayer still echoing in the night air, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. The morning sun cast long shadows through the cottage windows as Dawson balanced a tray of breakfast. Fresh coffee steam curled into the crisp air, mingling with the scent of warm blueberry muffins and scrambled eggs. He'd gotten up early to prepare it himself, something he hadn't done since Caroline was alive. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path as he approached the cottage. When he knocked, there was a shuffling inside before Sienna opened the door. Her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept much, and behind her he could see an open suitcase on the bed. You're leaving? The words came out before he could stop them. The tray suddenly felt heavy in his hands. Sienna stepped back, allowing him inside. I can't stay here, Mr. Cross, not with everything that's happening. Please, call me Dawson. He set the tray down on the small table by the window. And I understand why you'd want to leave, but I'm asking you to wait. She shook her head, folding, a sweater with trembling hands. I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to face this my way. Just give me a minute. Dawson hurried out to his car and returned with a thick manila folder. I've been up most of the night working on this. Sienna paused her packing, curiosity winning over her resolve to leave. Dawson spread the documents across the table, careful not to disturb the breakfast tray. These are internal memos from 2 years ago, he explained, pointing to highlighted sections. Look at the dates. The theft report was filed 3 days before the actual audit showed any missing funds. And here, he pulled out another paper. The signature authorizing your termination doesn't match other documents from that board member. Sienna sank into a chair, her fingers tracing the words that had destroyed her life. You're reopening the case? I've already started. I've hired an independent investigator and a forensic accountant. Dawson sat across from her, his voice earnest. Give me 1 week, Sienna. That's all I'm asking. Let me try to make this right. She stared at the steaming coffee cup before her, watching her reflection ripple in the dark liquid. 1 week, she finally said. But I'm not hiding anymore. Relief flooded Dawson's face. Thank you. He gestured to the breakfast. It's probably getting cold. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning light growing stronger. Later that day, Dawson drove Sienna to her first physical therapy session. The bruises were fading, but her muscles still ached from that night at the shelter. I used to love driving with the windows down, Sienna said suddenly as they cruised along the lakeside road. Singing at the top of my lungs. Dawson glanced at her. Carolyn used to talk about your voice, said it could make angels jealous. A shadow crossed Sienna's face. I haven't sung since everything happened. Feels like it belongs to someone else now, someone clean. The physical therapy session was difficult. Dawson waited in the car, answering emails but constantly checking his phone for messages from his investigator. When Sienna emerged, looking tired but determined, he suggested they take the long way back. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Dawson would bring breakfast, they'd talk over coffee, and then he'd drive her to therapy. Sometimes they'd stop at a small diner for lunch, where conversations gradually grew deeper. After Caroline died, Dawson admitted one afternoon over soup and sandwiches, I thought if I just worked harder, gave more money, built bigger buildings, it would somehow make up for not being there enough when she was sick. The foundation became more about numbers than people. Sienna studied him across the table. Grief makes us do strange things. When I lost my music, I lost my way of talking to God. That evening they walked along the lake shore, their footsteps synchronized in the soft sand. The setting sun painted the water in shades of amber and rose. You know, Dawson said softly, watching a flock of geese glide overhead. I've been thinking about what you said about feeling unclean. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your voice was never the sin, Sienna. It was the gift. Still is. Sienna stopped walking, her eyes filling with tears. She turned to face the water, but Dawson caught a glimpse of something he hadn't seen before. A smile, small but real, like the first star appearing in the evening sky. They stood there in companionable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The lake breeze carried the scent of pine and possibility, and for the first time in years, both felt the weight of their guilt beginning to lift. Maybe, Sienna whispered, more to herself than to Dawson. Maybe some gifts can't be taken away. They just wait for us to be ready again. The smile remained on her face, fragile but genuine, as they walked back to the cottage. Behind them, their footprints in the sand told the story of two broken people walking toward healing, one step at a time. The day ended with the promise of more conversations to come, more truths to uncover, and perhaps, in time, more songs to sing. The morning sunlight streamed through the cottage windows as Sienna wiped down the kitchen counter. 3 days had passed since their lakeside walk, and the peaceful routine had begun to feel almost normal. As she moved to dust the windowsill, an old hymn surfaced in her memory. Amazing Grace. Without thinking, she began to hum softly, the familiar melody flowing naturally as she worked. Outside on the garden path, Dawson paused mid-step, coffee cups in hand. The gentle humming drifted through the screen door, stopping him in his tracks. He hadn't heard music from Sienna since that terrible day 2 years ago. Standing quietly, he listened as the notes gained confidence, her humming growing slightly stronger. When she turned and saw him in the doorway, the music stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry," she said, dropping her cleaning cloth. "I didn't realize. Please don't stop," Dawson said quickly, setting the coffee cups down. "It's been too long since these walls heard any music." Sienna shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Dawson said softly. "It was beautiful." He hesitated, then added, "You know, there's a piano in the main house. Caroline's piano. Nobody's touched it since." He cleared his throat. "Would you consider playing? Maybe this evening?" The fear flickered across Sienna's face, but something else showed there too. Longing. "I don't know if I can." "Just one song," Dawson suggested. "Whatever you feel comfortable with. No pressure." Throughout the day, Sienna's mind kept returning to the piano. After dinner, Dawson led her to the main house's music room. The grand piano stood by floor-to-ceiling windows, its polished surface reflecting the last rays of sunset. Sienna's fingers trembled as she touched the keys. "Take your time," Dawson said, settling into an armchair nearby. Sienna sat at the bench, running her hands lightly over the ivory keys. The familiar position brought back memories of choir practices, church services, Caroline's foundation events, days when music flowed freely from her soul. She began with a simple chord, then another. The first notes of "Amazing Grace" came out tentatively, her voice cracking on the opening words. But as she continued, something deep within her began to stir. By the second verse, her voice gained strength, filling the room with rich, soulful tones that spoke of both pain and hope. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." When she finished, the last note hung in the air like a prayer. Dawson sat motionless, tears glistening in his eyes. He clapped softly, the sound gentle but sincere. "Thank you," he whispered. That evening marked a turning point. The next day, Sienna found herself drawn back to the piano. Dawson would bring his laptop to the music room, working while she played. Sometimes he'd request a song, other times he'd just listen. Laughter began to punctuate their evenings, genuine, healing laughter that seemed to chase away the shadows. One night, as Dawson reviewed charity reports, Sienna glanced over his shoulder. "Wait," she said, pointing to a column of numbers. "Those donation amounts, they don't match what I remember from the events." Dawson frowned, pulling up more documents. "What do you mean?" "The Christmas gala 2 years ago," Sienna explained, leaning closer. "I remember the final tally because Caroline was so excited. It was much higher than what's recorded here." Something clicked in Dawson's mind. He began cross-referencing files, his expression growing more focused. The discrepancies, they're all from events where large cash donations were collected, events where certain board members had direct access to the funds. They worked late into the night, piecing together a pattern of manipulation that stretched back years. Sienna's memory of the events, combined with Dawson's access to the records, finally revealed the truth they'd been seeking. The next morning, Dawson arrived at the cottage early, his eyes bright with purpose. "I know how to fix this," he said, setting out fresh coffee. "We're going to hold a charity gala, a big one. I'll announce complete reforms of the Foundation's financial oversight. New board members, new procedures. Everything transparent. Sienna nodded slowly, seeing the logic in his plan. And, Dawson continued, his voice softening, I want you to sing. Not just one song, I want you to be the featured performer. The coffee cup froze halfway to Sienna's lips. Dawson, I can't. Those people, they all think... They'll know the truth by then. He assured her. This is your chance to reclaim your voice, your reputation, everything that was taken from you. Sienna set down her cup, her hands shaking slightly. The thought of facing all those people, standing on stage again, made her stomach clench. But as she looked at Dawson's unwavering faith in her, something shifted inside. The seed of courage he'd planted began to take root. When? She asked finally. 2 weeks from now, enough time to prepare but soon enough to make an impact. Sienna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. The old fear whispered that she wasn't ready, wasn't worthy. But another voice, stronger and clearer, reminded her of how it felt to sing again, to let the music flow through her like a healing stream. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. Dawson's face lit up with a smile that reminded her of Caroline's, full of warmth and belief in the goodness that could emerge from darkness. They spent the rest of the morning planning the event, their shared purpose creating a bridge between past wounds and future healing. The piano in the music room would see many more hours of practice in the days to come, each note carrying Sienna closer to the person she used to be, or perhaps to someone stronger than she'd ever been before. Sienna stood in the dimly lit backstage area of the Grand Hyatt's ballroom, her heart pounding against her ribs. The borrowed dress from Caroline's wardrobe, a simple black gown with delicate beading, felt both comforting and overwhelming. Her fingers traced the soft fabric, wondering if Caroline's spirit somehow lingered in these threads. The murmur of the gathered crowd filtered through the heavy curtains. Wealthy donors, board members, and local media filled the elegant space beyond. Sienna closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. 2 years ago, she'd stood on similar stages with confidence. Now her hands wouldn't stop shaking. 5 minutes, a stage manager whispered, touching her elbow gently. Sienna nodded, unable to form words. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see Dawson approaching the podium. He looked dignified in his dark suit, but she noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. He was carrying his own weight tonight. The spotlights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. Dawson adjusted the microphone, his voice carrying clear and strong through the sound system. Good evening, he began. Many of you know me as the head of Cross Foundation. Tonight, I stand before you not just as a CEO, but as a man who lost his way. The crowd stirred, uncomfortable with this unexpected opening. 2 weeks ago, the St. Martha's Women's Shelter, a facility funded by our foundation, was forced to close its doors. The official story cited financial irregularities. The truth is far more troubling. Dawson paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Through negligence and misplaced trust, I allowed corruption to take root in our organization. Board members embezzled funds meant to protect vulnerable women. When one brave soul tried to speak up, she was silenced, first through false accusations, then through violence. Gasps rippled through the audience. Several board members shifted uneasily in their seats. I bear personal responsibility for what happened. By focusing on numbers instead of people, I failed to honor the mission my late wife Caroline believed in so deeply. His voice softened at Caroline's name. Tonight marks a new beginning. We're implementing complete financial transparency, appointing new board members, and most importantly, restoring justice to someone who never deserved to fall. Sienna's heart climbed into her throat as Dawson turned toward the curtain. Many of you remember her voice. It used to fill rooms like this with light and hope. Caroline once told me that when this woman sang, she could hear angels harmonizing. He smiled softly at the memory. Please welcome to the stage the voice that once carried light into my late wife's heart, Miss Sienna Washington. The spotlight swung toward the curtain as Sienna stepped out. The bright light felt like judgment, making her want to retreat. But then she caught Dawson's encouraging nod, and something inside her strengthened. She walked to the piano, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood stage. The keys gleamed under the lights, waiting. Sienna sat down, adjusted the microphone, and let her fingers rest on the familiar ivory. This song, she said quietly, is called Clean Again. The opening notes filled the space, gentle as rain. When she began to sing, her voice trembled on the first few words. Stains that won't wash away marks that time won't fade, standing in the pour of grace, still feeling afraid. But as she continued, strength flowed into her voice. The years of pain, shame, and silent prayers poured into each word. But your love keeps falling like mercy's sweet rain, till all that was broken is clean again. Tears streamed down faces in the audience. A reporter dabbed at her eyes while trying to keep her camera steady. Even the most hardened business executives found themselves moved by the raw emotion in Sienna's voice. As she reached the final chorus, her voice soared with newfound power. Let it pour down, let it wash clean, till every scar and shadow becomes what you see, and I'm clean again, finally clean again. The last note faded into profound silence. Then, like a wave breaking, applause erupted. People rose to their feet, their ovation thunderous and sincere. Through tear-blurred eyes, Sienna saw Dawson beaming with pride. He returned to the microphone as the applause finally settled. Tonight marks more than just a performance. I'm honored to announce that Sienna Washington will be taking the position of Executive Director for our new Women's Restoration Foundation. Her experience, compassion, and strength make her the perfect choice to lead this vital new initiative. More applause followed, along with congratulatory smiles from the audience. Sienna felt light-headed with joy and disbelief. After 2 years of closed doors and whispered accusations, here was restoration she never thought possible. The formal portion of the evening wound down, giving way to mingling and celebration. Well-wishers surrounded Sienna, offering congratulations and support. Several women whispered their own stories of healing, inspired by her courage to sing again. "This is your story now," Dawson said softly when he finally made his way to her side. "You're going to help so many women find their voice again." Sienna smiled, feeling truly clean for the first time in years. She pulled out her phone to capture this moment, to share it with her family. But as she opened her social media app, a news headline caught her eye and froze the breath in her lungs. Assault case dropped, confidential settlement signed by Dawson Cross. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling fingers. She looked up at Dawson, who was still smiling and chatting with guests, unaware that her moment of triumph had just shattered into 1,000 sharp questions. The sleek black limousine glided through Atlanta's nighttime streets, its interior thick with tension. The soft glow from passing streetlights caught the sequins on Caroline's borrowed gown, making Sienna sparkle like a wounded star. Her hands shook as she held up her phone, the harsh blue light illuminating tears in her eyes. "You made a deal with them behind my back." The words burst from her like shattered glass. The screen trembled in front of Dawson's face, forcing him to see the damning headline. Dawson's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What? I never—" He reached for the phone, reading the article with growing alarm. "Sienna, I swear I didn't sign anything. This is the first I'm hearing about it." "Stop lying." Her voice cracked with raw pain. "I trusted you. I got up on that stage thinking you were different, thinking you actually cared about justice." She pressed herself against the car door, putting as much distance between them as possible. "But this whole time, you were just trying to save your reputation." "Sienna, please listen." Dawson leaned forward, his face earnest in the dim light. "I would never do this to you. Something's wrong here. Let me investigate." "Investigate?" She laughed bitterly. "Like you investigated when I was accused of theft, or when the shelter was being robbed." Her fingers clutched Caroline's gown. The fabric that had felt like a blessing now seemed to mock her. "You know what hurts the most? I actually believed in you. When you said you wanted to make things right, I believed you." The car pulled through the iron gates of Dawson's estate, gravel crunching beneath its wheels. Before it could come to a complete stop, Sienna yanked the door handle. "Sienna, wait!" Dawson called after her. "At least let me explain." But she was already running, her heels clicking rapidly across the driveway. "You only helped me to help yourself," she shouted over her shoulder, her voice echoing across the moonlit grounds. The sound of her pain hung in the air long after she disappeared into the shadows of the guest cottage. Dawson sat frozen in the car, his world tilting sideways. Everything he'd worked to rebuild was crumbling again. He pulled out his phone, dialing his assistant's emergency number. "Marcus, I need you to pull every document related to Sienna's assault case. Now, someone's made a settlement without my authorization." 20 minutes later, Dawson stood in his office, surrounded by hastily printed papers. Marcus, his assistant, looked uncomfortable as he pointed to a signature at the bottom of the settlement agreement. "It looks like your signature, sir, but the timeline doesn't match. You were with Miss Washington at physical therapy when this was supposedly signed." Dawson's jaw clenched as he examined the document more closely. "Get me Richard Morton on the phone. Now." The call to his corporate lawyer went straight to voicemail. A second attempt reached Morton's secretary, who nervously admitted that Richard had left the office early, taking several files with him. "He did what?" Dawson's voice was dangerously quiet. More digging revealed a trail of forged signatures, backdated documents, and carefully hidden transfers. Morton had been covering the Foundation's corruption for months, protecting board members who had been stealing funds. The settlement was his final attempt to bury the truth. "Send security to Morton's office. Lock it down. I want every document, every computer." Dawson's commands came rapid fire as he paced the room. "Call the police and get me the Foundation's board chairman." The next hour was a blur of calls and emergency meetings. Morton was officially fired, his access revoked, his crimes documented. But with each passing minute, Dawson felt Sienna slipping further away. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he finally walked to the guest cottage. The porch light cast lonely shadows across empty rocking chairs. His knock echoed hollowly. "Sienna?" he called softly. "Please, I can prove what happened. Morton forged my signature. I've fired him, and we're pressing charges." No answer came. With growing dread, he used his master key to open the door. The cottage was empty. Caroline's gown lay carefully folded on the bed, a silent apology. Beside it, a small note read simply, "Thank you for the gown. I'm sorry I couldn't be worthy of it." Dawson sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. Her guitar case was gone. The few clothes she'd accumulated during her stay had vanished. Even the sheet music they'd worked on together had disappeared, leaving only blank spaces on the coffee table. Dawn began to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink, but Sienna Washington had vanished into the night, taking with her both his chance at redemption and his emerging hope for something more than mere atonement. The only traces of her presence were the lingering scent of her perfume and the painful echo of her last words. You only helped me to help yourself." How cruel that his attempt to right one wrong had led to an even deeper betrayal. Not by his own hand this time, but through the very system he'd built to protect people like her. The irony felt like a physical weight on his chest as he sat alone in the cottage, where just days ago they'd shared laughter and music and the tentative beginnings of trust. The autumn leaves scattered across Dawson Cross's sprawling estate, golden and crimson against the manicured lawn. Inside his mansion, silence hung heavy in rooms that once echoed with music and hope. 3 weeks had passed since Sienna's departure, and each day brought new headlines that tarnished the Cross family name. "Cross Foundation mired in corruption scandal," screamed the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Fraud at prestigious charity, board members resign," declared the Business Weekly. Dawson sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of financial records and legal documents. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, but he ignored them all. The investigation had revealed deeper corruption than anyone imagined. 8 board members had resigned in disgrace, and federal authorities were conducting their own probe. Though he was innocent, his reputation lay in tatters. The foundation's good work over the years was overshadowed by scandal. Donors withdrew their support. Even longtime friends distanced themselves, unsure what to believe. Late one evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Dawson found himself reaching for his phone. His fingers moved automatically, playing the voicemail he'd saved for 2 years. Caroline's voice filled the room, weak but determined. "Darling, I just heard Sienna sing at the shelter again. Such a pure voice, like an angel's. Promise me, Dawson, help people like her find their light. That's what this foundation should be about, not just writing checks, but lifting spirits." He closed his eyes, letting the familiar words wash over him. "I love you." Caroline's message ended. "Don't forget what matters most." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd tried to help Sienna, only to have everything fall apart. But as he sat there in the growing darkness, something shifted in his perspective. This wasn't about salvaging his reputation or proving his innocence. It was about making things right, truly right, for people like Sienna who had been hurt by the system he'd created. Across town, in a neighborhood where paint peeled from buildings and security bars covered windows, Sienna Washington unlocked the door to her rented room. The space was tiny, barely big enough for a bed, a chair, and her guitar case, but it was all she could afford on her meager earnings from the community center. She'd found work there 2 weeks ago, teaching basic music classes to children and seniors. The pay was minimal, but something about those eager faces helped ease her pain. When tiny voices joined her in singing "This Little Light of Mine," or elderly hands clapped along to old spirituals, she felt fragments of her old self returning. Each evening, after the classes ended, Sienna would sit in her room with her journal. Though anger and hurt still churned inside her, she found herself writing prayers for Dawson. Sometimes they were just a few words. "Lord, give him peace." Other times pages flowed with her confused emotions. "I don't understand, God." She wrote one night, "Why did you let me trust again, only to have it broken? But even now, I can't hate him. Help me understand." She avoided newspapers and social media, not wanting to see anything about the Cross Foundation scandal. The community center became her sanctuary, far removed from the wealthy world she'd briefly re-entered. Then, one rainy Tuesday, as she was packing up her guitar after an afternoon class, Mary Beth, one of the regular volunteers, rushed in waving her phone. "Sienna, you need to see this!" The older woman's face was flushed with excitement. "It's about Mr. Cross's lawyer. He confessed to everything." Sienna's hands froze on her guitar case. "What?" Mary Beth held out her phone, showing a news video. Richard Morton, Dawson's former lawyer, stood outside the federal courthouse, surrounded by reporters. His face was haggard as he admitted to forging Dawson's signature, to covering up the board's corruption, to arranging the unauthorized settlement about Sienna's assault. Mr. Cross knew nothing about these actions, Morton stated clearly. I betrayed his trust and the Foundation's principles. I accept full responsibility. The phone slipped from Sienna's trembling fingers. Mary Beth caught it before it hit the floor. Oh, honey, the older woman said softly, seeing tears stream down Sienna's face. Did you know him well? Sienna could only nod, overwhelmed by the realization that she had misjudged Dawson completely. He had been telling the truth that night. While she'd run away, believing the worst of him, he'd been fighting to expose the real corruption. I need a minute, she whispered, stumbling towards the community center's small chapel. The space was dark and quiet, lit only by a few votive candles. Sienna sank into a back pew, her tears falling freely now, all the prayers she'd written, all the hurt and confusion she'd poured out in her journal, they took on new meaning. I'm sorry, she whispered into the silence. I'm so sorry I didn't trust, didn't listen. Without conscious thought, she began to sing. It was an old hymn, one her grandmother had taught her. Amazing Grace. Her voice, though scratchy with tears, grew stronger with each verse. She sang about being lost and found, about grace teaching hearts to fear and fears relieved. A few people from the afternoon classes paused in the hallway, drawn by the sound. Mary Beth stood in the doorway, tissue in hand. But Sienna barely noticed them. This wasn't a performance. It was a prayer, a confession, an offering of her broken trust to be mended. When the final note faded, she remained seated, feeling both emptied and filled. It was the first time she'd sung in public since the gala, and somehow it felt like coming home, not to a place, but to herself. Later that night, in her small room, Sienna opened her journal again. But instead of prayers, she began to write a letter. Dear Dawson, I saw the news today. I know now that you were innocent, that you tried to tell me that night, and I wouldn't listen. My hurt and fear made me doubt you when you had done nothing but try to help. I don't know if you can forgive me for running away, for adding to your burden during this difficult time. But I want you to know that I'm praying for you, and I'm sorry. She stopped writing, tears blurring the words. Outside her window, a streetlight flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. In that moment, Sienna realized that true healing wasn't just about being made clean again. It was about learning to trust again, even after being broken. It was about offering forgiveness, even when it hurt. She turned back to her journal, adding one final line. The light you tried to help me find? Maybe it was inside us both all along, just waiting for grace to clear away the shadows. The autumn morning dawned clear and crisp as Dawson sat in his study, staring at his phone. After weeks of respecting Sienna's silence, he'd finally reached out to Pastor Marcus, who ran the church where she used to sing. The conversation had been brief but revelatory. She's been helping at the East Side Community Center, Marcus had told him. Leading a women's choir. Those ladies, many of them have stories like hers. They needed someone who understood, who could help them find their voice again. Now Dawson drove his Mercedes through unfamiliar streets, the gleaming luxury car looking out of place among the worn buildings and faded storefronts. The community center was a modest brick structure with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign announcing, "All are welcome here." He parked across the street, his heart pounding as he reached into his briefcase. The folded cloth he pulled out was white now, carefully laundered, but he could still remember the stark crimson stains from that first night at the hospital. He'd kept it all these weeks, a reminder of his failure and his promise. As he approached the building, voices drifted through the open windows. Dawson stopped, recognizing the melody of Amazing Grace. But it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of women, their harmonies raw and real, and leading them was Sienna. He slipped quietly through the front door, following the music to a large room filled with wooden chairs. About 20 women of various ages sat in a loose circle, their faces lifted as they sang. Sienna stood in the center, her hands moving gently to guide them. Her voice was different now, not the polished performance he remembered from foundation events. This was softer, steadier, carrying an authenticity that brought tears to his eyes. She wore simple jeans and a faded sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical braid, but she glowed with a quiet confidence he'd never seen before. Amazing Grace! How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me! The words filled the room, each woman adding her own story to the ancient hymn. Some voices cracked with emotion, others soared with newfound strength, but together they created something beautiful and healing. Dawson stayed at the back, partially hidden by a support column. He watched as Sienna moved among the singers, touching a shoulder here, offering an encouraging smile there. This was where she belonged, not on some grand stage, but here among the broken, helping them find their way back to wholeness. The final notes faded into reverent silence. Women wiped tears, hugged each other, gathered their belongings. Sienna spoke quietly with each one as they left, and Dawson could see the bonds of trust and understanding between them. Finally, only Sienna remained, gathering sheet music from a rickety piano. Dawson stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the empty room. She turned, and for a moment they just looked at each other, all the pain and misunderstanding of the past weeks hanging between them. "Your voice," he said softly. "It's stronger now." Sienna's hands tightened on the papers she held. Not stronger, just more honest, maybe. Dawson moved closer, holding out the folded cloth. "I kept this," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I thought I could make you clean again, but I was wrong." She stared at the cloth, recognition flickering in her eyes. "The hospital?" "Yes." He swallowed hard. "I thought if I could just fix everything, clear your name, restore your position, make all the wrong things right, then you'd be whole again. But that's not how healing works, is it?" Tears filled Sienna's eyes as she reached for the cloth. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and neither pulled away immediately. "You never stopped caring," she whispered, realization dawning in her voice. "How could I?" Dawson's words were barely audible. "Carolyn saw something in you. Something pure and true. I was too blind to see it then, too caught up in systems and solutions. But watching you here today..." He gestured to the empty chairs, still holding the energy of the women who'd filled them. "This is real healing, not something that can be bought or managed, something that only grace can bring." A tear slipped down Sienna's cheek as she looked at the clean white cloth in her hands. "I thought you'd betrayed me," she admitted. "When I saw that headline about the settlement, I let my old wounds tell me lies about you. I would never..." Dawson started, then stopped himself. "No, I understand why you believed it. I represented everything that had hurt you before. I'm so sorry, Sienna, not just for what happened 2 years ago, but for thinking I could somehow purchase your redemption." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe we were both learning the same lesson. That healing doesn't come from outside, not from money or status, or even other people's forgiveness. It comes from grace," they said together, and something shifted in the space between them, like a wall crumbling or a window opening to let in light. The empty community hall held a sacred stillness as Dawson and Sienna moved to sit in 2 of the worn wooden chairs. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting pools of amber, crimson, and sapphire across the scuffed floor. The colors danced around them like silent witnesses to this moment of truth. Dawson's shoulders hunched forward as he gathered his thoughts. The polished businessman facade had crumbled, leaving just a man trying to make things right. "I need to tell you everything," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "About the settlement, about what really happened." Sienna sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, the cleaned hospital cloth resting between them like a bridge across their shared past. She didn't speak, but her eyes held his, giving him space to continue. "My corporate lawyer, Marcus Bennett, forged my signature on that settlement," Dawson began, the words tumbling out like stones he'd been carrying too long. He was protecting himself. He'd been helping the board members embezzle funds from the foundation for years. When you were attacked at the shelter, his voice caught. They saw an opportunity to bury everything. They thought if they could discredit you again, no one would look deeper. Sunlight shifted across the floor as clouds passed outside. Sienna's breath came out in a soft whisper. "How did you find out?" "My assistant found irregularities in the paperwork. Documents I supposedly signed when I was actually across town at the hospital with you." Dawson's hands clenched into fists. "The moment I discovered it, I fired Bennett. He's facing criminal charges now, along with half the board." He turned to face her fully, his eyes filled with remorse. "But that's not the worst part. When I started digging, I found out they were the same ones who accused you of theft 2 years ago. They needed a scapegoat when money started disappearing, and you—" He shook his head. "You were an easy target. Young, trusting, no powerful connections to protect you." Sienna closed her eyes, absorbing this truth she'd suspected but never known for certain. "All this time," she murmured, "I thought I must have done something wrong, that maybe I'd missed some sign, made some mistake." "No," Dawson said firmly. "The mistake was mine. I was so caught up in running the foundation like a business that I forgot its heart. Caroline—" His voice softened at his late wife's name. "She always said charity without love is just accounting. I didn't understand what she meant until now." A shaft of colored light fell across Sienna's face as she opened her eyes again. "Tell me about her," she said gently. "About Caroline. I only knew her from the events, but she always made me feel seen." Dawson's face softened with memory. "She had this gift for seeing past people's surfaces. When she was dying, she made me promise to help people find their light." He gave a bitter laugh. "I thought that meant throwing money at problems, building bigger programs, more impressive facilities. But that's not what she meant at all." "What did she mean?" Sienna asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. "She meant this." Dawson gestured to the room around them, to the empty chairs that had held broken women finding healing through song. Real connection, real healing. You can't buy grace. You can only create space for it to work. Sienna nodded slowly. "That's what I've learned here. These women don't need someone to save them. They need someone to walk beside them while they save themselves." "I was so arrogant," Dawson admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I could fix everything with money and influence. Clear your name, restore your position, make it all go away. But real healing doesn't work like that, does it?" "No," Sienna said softly. "It doesn't." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the colored light shift and dance around them. Then, slowly, deliberately, Sienna reached out and placed her hand over his. The touch was gentle but firm, a bridge across years of misunderstanding. "You didn't ruin me, Dawson," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. I let the world tell me I was ruined, but I'm still here. The simple statement hung in the air between them, dissolving the last remnants of the wall that had separated them. Dawson turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, like two parts of a whole finally finding their way back together. These women, Sienna continued, gesturing to the empty chairs. They come here thinking they're broken beyond repair, but every time they raise their voices together, every time they share their stories, she smiled, they discover they're stronger than they knew. Dawson watched her face as she spoke, seeing the passion that lit her from within. This wasn't the polished performer from his foundation galas, nor the broken woman from the hospital. This was someone new, someone who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. We could rebuild the shelter, he said suddenly. Not under my name. That's not what it needs, but under a new name, one that speaks to second chances and new beginnings. Sienna's eyes widened. You'd do that, even after everything that happened? Especially after everything that happened. Dawson squeezed her hand gently. But this time, we do it right. No corporate board, no fancy galas. Just real. People helping real people find their way back to wholeness. The sunlight seemed to brighten around them as Sienna nodded slowly. A place where grace can work, she said softly, echoing his earlier words. A place where voices can be found again. Dawson added, thinking of the powerful harmony he'd witnessed earlier. They sat together in the growing quiet, their joined hands a testament to the healing power of truth and forgiveness. Through the stained glass windows, the afternoon light painted them in colors of hope, amber for new beginnings, crimson for restored passion, sapphire for the depth of understanding they'd finally reached. In that moment, both understood that their journey wasn't about fixing what was broken, but about creating space for something new to grow from the ashes of the old. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it into something beautiful and true. The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh paint through the open windows of what would soon become the House of Grace. Dawson Cross stood in the doorway of the former warehouse, watching as volunteers scrubbed windows and assembled donated furniture. The deed to his downtown office building had been signed over just 3 weeks ago, and already the transformation was remarkable. The delivery truck's here with more beds, Sienna called from the loading dock, clipboard in hand. Her voice carried authority now, confidence returning with each passing day. She wore faded jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, her hair tied back in a practical bandana. Gone was the haunted look in her eyes, replaced by purposeful determination. Dawson hurried to help direct the unloading. "Where do you want these?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. The expensive watch he once wore had been replaced by a simple rubber band, better suited for manual labor. "Second floor, rooms 12 through 15, Sienna replied, checking her list. She paused to help a former shelter resident arrange pillows on a freshly made bed. "Looking good, Maria. You've got a real talent for this." Maria beamed at the praise. Like many of the new staff members, she had once been homeless herself. Now she earned a living wage helping others find their way back. The shelter's new hiring policy had been Sienna's idea, giving jobs to women who understood the journey firsthand. "Remember when this place was just empty concrete?" Dawson mused as they carried boxes upstairs. The industrial space had been transformed with warm colors and comfortable furnishings. Local artists had donated paintings, and quilting groups had supplied handmade blankets for every bed. Sienna smiled, running her hand along a freshly painted wall in soft sage green. "It's amazing what a little hope can do." "And a lot of elbow grease," Dawson added with a chuckle. wiping sweat from his brow. They had deliberately kept his involvement quiet. No press releases, no grand announcements about the billionaire's latest charitable venture. Instead, word spread organically through church groups and community organizations. Donations came in small but steady amounts, furniture from local thrift stores, supplies from neighborhood businesses, volunteer hours from countless helping hands. Pastor Elaine Brooks visited regularly, offering guidance and spiritual support. Today she stood in what would become the shelter's chapel, arranging hymnals in the pews. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said as Sienna approached. Who would have thought 6 months ago that all this would rise from such dark times? Sienna nodded, remembering the night she'd stumbled into the hospital, broken and afraid. "I still can't believe how far we've come." "That's because you weren't walking alone," Pastor Elaine said wisely. "None of us are meant to carry our burdens by ourselves." She straightened up, fixing Sienna with her characteristic direct gaze. "Which reminds me, we're having a dedication service next Sunday. The congregation would be blessed to hear you sing." Sienna's hand flew instinctively to her throat. Though she'd been leading informal singing sessions with the shelter's residents, she hadn't performed in public since the ill-fated gala. "I don't know." "You do know," Pastor Elaine said firmly. "That voice of yours isn't just for private use, it's a gift meant to be shared." From across the room, Dawson watched the exchange with quiet interest. He'd learned to step back, to let Sienna find her own way forward. His role now was support, not rescue. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Furniture was arranged, kitchen equipment installed, security systems tested. Every detail had been carefully planned with the residents' safety and dignity in mind. The shelter would offer not just beds, but job training, counseling, and most importantly, community. On Saturday evening, Dawson found Sienna in the chapel, sitting alone at the piano. Her fingers moved silently over the keys as she mouthed the words to an old hymn. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked softly. She nodded. "What if I'm not ready? What if my voice isn't strong enough?" "Your voice has always been strong enough," Dawson said, sitting beside her. "Even when you whispered, it carried truth." Sienna turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I keep thinking about that night at the hospital. How lost I felt, how unclean." She took a deep breath. "But standing here now, seeing all this, it's like everything that was broken is being rebuilt into something better." "That's what grace does," Dawson replied. "It doesn't just restore, it transforms." They sat together in comfortable silence as evening light filtered through the chapel's simple windows. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they could rest in the knowledge that they had created something genuine and good. The dedication service dawned clear and bright. Community members filled the chapel to capacity, their excited chatter falling silent as Pastor Elaine stepped to the podium. "We gather today to dedicate this house of grace," she began, her rich voice carrying to every corner. "Not just as a shelter, but as a testament to the power of second chances and the strength of the human spirit." Sienna sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dawson had chosen a seat near the back, wanting the focus to remain on the shelter's mission rather than his presence. When Pastor Elaine called Sienna forward, the room grew completely still. She walked to the piano with measured steps, took her seat, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she closed her eyes, gathering courage. Then she began to play, and her voice rose clear and true. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The familiar words took on new meaning in this space, sung by this woman who had lived their truth. Other voices joined in, shelter staff, volunteers, community members, until the chapel rang with harmony. Dawson watched from his place at the back, remembering Caroline's words about helping people find their light. He hadn't understood then that sometimes the greatest help came not from fixing things, but from creating space for healing to happen naturally. The House of Grace wouldn't solve every problem or heal every hurt, but it would offer what its name promised, a place where grace could work its quiet miracles, one life at a time. The morning of the grand opening dawned with golden promise, sunlight streaming through Atlanta's autumn haze. Outside the newly renovated House of Grace, volunteers arranged rows of white folding chairs on the freshly laid grass. The building itself seemed to glow, its red brick facade scrubbed clean, new windows gleaming, and a hand-carved wooden sign proclaiming its name in elegant letters. Sienna arrived early, her guitar case clutched tight against her side. She paused at the entrance, remembering how different things had been just months ago when this place lay abandoned and dark. Now, fresh paint brightened the walls, and vases of wildflowers decorated every windowsill. The scent of coffee and fresh-baked muffins wafted from the new industrial kitchen where several formerly homeless women, now employed as staff, prepared refreshments for the ceremony. "Everything looks perfect," came a quiet voice behind her. Dawson stood there, dressed not in his usual business suit, but in simple khakis and a blue button-down shirt. He looked more human this way, more like the man who had sat with her through long evenings of healing and hope. "I can hardly believe it's real," Sienna replied, running her hand along the smooth wooden banister they'd installed last week. "When I think about that night at the shelter—" "Don't," Dawson said gently. "Today isn't about what happened then. It's about what happens next." By 10 o'clock, the grounds were filling with people. Local news vans lined the street, their reporters setting up cameras and microphones. Community leaders mingled with shelter volunteers, while curious neighbors gathered at the edges of the crowd. Pastor Elaine moved through the gathering, greeting everyone with warm handshakes and genuine smiles. Inside the shelter's new chapel, Sienna sat alone at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as she reviewed the sheet music for Unfinished, the song she'd written during those quiet weeks of healing at Dawson's cottage. The lyrics lay bare every wound, every struggle, but also every step toward redemption. She hadn't let anyone hear it yet, not even Dawson. A knock at the door startled her. 5 minutes, called one of the volunteers. Sienna closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. "Lord, let this be more than just a song. Let it be healing for someone else, too." The chapel filled quickly. Dawson chose a spot near the middle of the crowd, wanting neither to hide nor to draw attention to himself. He watched as Sienna made her way to the microphone, noticed how she stood straighter now, her shoulders back, head high. Gone was the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long. Pastor Elaine opened the ceremony with a prayer, then spoke about the shelter's mission. "This place," she said, gesturing to the walls around them, "is more than brick and mortar. It's a testament to the power of second chances, to the truth that no one is beyond redemption." When it was time for Sienna to sing, a hush fell over the room. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes filled the chapel, clear and strong. "Broken pieces on the floor, trying to make sense of what came before, thought my story was already told, but grace keeps writing more." Her voice, rich with emotion, carried every ounce of her journey. In the crowd, people began to weep quietly, recognizing their own struggles in her words. "I'm unfinished, still being made, every scar a mark of grace, through the darkness, through the pain. Love is writing my unfinished tale." Dawson felt tears rolling down his cheeks as memories flooded back. Sienna collapsed in the hospital hallway, her whispered words about being unclean, the long nights of healing at the cottage. Now here she stood, transformed not by his wealth or power, but by something far more profound. The second verse spoke of shame transformed to strength, of wounds becoming wisdom. Sienna's voice soared to the rafters, no longer trembling but triumphant. Standing in the light at last, no more hiding from my past, every broken road that led me here, making peace with who I am, held by grace's gentle hands, finding beauty in the unfinished years. As she sang the final chorus, other voices began joining in, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The harmony swelled, filling every corner of the chapel with hope. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, as if moved by a single impulse, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls and seeming to shake the very foundation of the building. Camera flashes sparkled through tears as reporters captured the moment. Sienna stood at the microphone, her own tears flowing freely now. She looked out at the crowd, at the shelter residents who had become family, at the volunteers who had worked alongside her, at Dawson standing quietly in their midst, and saw in their faces the same truth she had finally come to accept. That sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones still being written. Through the applause, through the tears and smiles and embraces that followed, something profound had shifted. The House of Grace had transformed from a symbol of past pain into a beacon of future hope. And Sienna, standing in its light, knew she too had been transformed, not into someone new, but into who she'd been all along, before shame and fear had tried to silence her song. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps of the House of Grace as the celebration began winding down. Inside, the warmth of community still hummed with life. Women chatting over paper plates filled with potluck dishes, children chasing each other through the freshly painted hallways, their laughter a melody sweeter than any song. Sienna sat on the concrete steps, her formal dress gathered carefully around her knees. The day's emotions had left her exhausted, but filled with a deep, settled peace. She watched as volunteers helped clean up streamers and balloons, their movements unhurried and content. Dawson emerged from the building, loosening his tie as he stepped into the golden evening light. He carried 2 paper cups of punch, offering one to Sienna as he lowered himself to sit beside her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in strokes of pink and orange. From inside, the sounds of life drifted out. Dishes clinking, children giggling, women sharing stories in low, warm tones. Each noise was like a note in the symphony of healing that had begun here. "You know," Sienna said softly, turning the paper cup in her hands, "I keep thinking about Caroline today." She glanced at Dawson, gauging his reaction. His face softened at the mention of his late wife's name. The grief was still there, but it had mellowed into something gentler, more like gratitude for the time they'd had. "I think Caroline would have loved this," Sienna continued, gesturing to the building behind them. "All of it, the music, the laughter, the second chances." Dawson smiled, and for a moment he looked younger, unburdened. "She already does," he said simply. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Sienna watched as he unfolded it with reverent hands. It was the cloth from the hospital, the one that had come away stained with her blood, that first night. But now it was different. Someone had carefully cleaned it, and it had been professionally framed in a simple wooden shadow box. The cloth itself was pristine white again, though faint traces of what it had witnessed remained, telling its story of transformation. "This belongs here," Dawson said, his voice thick with emotion. He held it out to her. It's a reminder that nothing and no one is beyond restoration. Sienna took the frame, her fingers tracing the glass. She remembered that night in vivid detail, the pain, the shame, the feeling of being irreparably soiled. But now she saw something different in the cloth's carefully preserved folds, a testament to healing. Standing slowly, she walked to the entrance. Above the door was an empty space that seemed to have been waiting for just this moment. With Dawson's help, she hung the frame carefully, positioning it so the last rays of sunlight caught the white fabric, making it glow. No one who walks through these doors will ever be called unclean again, Sienna declared softly, her voice carrying the weight of promise. They stepped back to look at it together. The frame caught the light perfectly, transforming what had once been a symbol of shame into a beacon of hope. Below it, the shelter's new name, House of Grace, seemed to take on deeper meaning. As twilight deepened into dusk, the first stars began to appear. A cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the newly planted garden. Sienna found herself humming the melody of Unfinished, the song still fresh in her heart. Dawson listened for a moment, then surprised her by joining in. His voice was decidedly off-key, but his smile was genuine and warm. Sienna couldn't help but laugh, not at him, but with him, and the sound of their shared joy echoed off the building's walls, mixing with the evening air. Inside, someone started playing the piano, another resident finding her voice again. Children's footsteps pattered down hallways that had been designed not just for safety, but for joy. Women's voices lifted in conversation, and occasional bursts of laughter, each sound a testament to lives being rebuilt. The frame above the door caught the last rays of sunlight, sending prisms of color dancing across the entrance. What had once been stained was now transformed, just like the lives that would find sanctuary here. It stood as a quiet reminder that grace, once found, never truly leaves. It simply flows outward, touching other lives, creating ripples of healing that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. As night settled fully around them, the shelter's windows glowed with warm light, each one a promise of safety and new beginnings. The laughter of children and women continued to spill out into the evening air, creating a symphony of hope restored. In that moment, as Sienna and Dawson sat together on the steps, their impromptu duet fading into comfortable silence, the House of Grace stood as a testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The gentle hum of hope that filled the air wasn't just a feeling. It was a tangible presence, as real as the building itself, as lasting as the grace that had brought them all to this moment. It whispered of stories still being written, of songs yet to be sung, of hearts continuing to heal. In the growing darkness, the framed cloth above the door seemed to glow with its own light, a beacon for all who would come seeking shelter, saying without words, "Welcome home. Here you are clean. Here you are loved. Here you are free to begin again." The morning light painted golden stripes across Atlanta's skyline as dawn broke over the city. Wisps of mist danced above the lake's surface near the House of Grace, creating an ethereal scene that matched the peace in Sienna's heart. She woke before her alarm, the melody from last night's impromptu duet with Dawson still playing in her mind. The shelter buzzed with morning activity. In the dining area, women gathered around tables, some still wearing pajamas, others dressed for job interviews. Their laughter bounced off the walls, real, genuine laughter that spoke of safety found and fear left behind. "First good sleep I've had in 3 years," one woman announced, cradling her coffee cup. "The beds here feel like clouds," another added, helping her young daughter pour cereal. Sienna paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. These weren't just residents anymore, they were becoming family. The front door chimed, and Dawson stepped in, carrying something that looked old and well-loved. As he approached, Sienna recognized it, a leather-bound notebook, its edges worn soft with use. Caroline's songwriting journal. "I think it's time you wrote your own again," he said softly, holding it out to her. Sienna's fingers trembled as she took it. The pages were filled with Caroline's flowing handwriting, lyrics, thoughts, prayers. Near the back, she found an empty page, pristine and waiting. Her pen hovered for a moment before touching the paper. Then the words came, flowing like water. "Grace doesn't erase what was. It builds something new from the ruins." Making her way to the old upright piano in the corner, Sienna sat down. Her fingers found the keys naturally, and a new melody began to form. It was tentative at first, then grew stronger, like a flower pushing through concrete. Small faces appeared in the doorway, children drawn by the music. They watched with wide eyes as Sienna's voice rose, clear and strong, no longer carrying any trace of shame or fear. Dawson stood behind her, and in that moment, he wasn't the billionaire who'd lost his way, or the man who'd tried to fix everything with money. He was simply someone who'd found his own redemption in helping others find theirs. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming the room filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and toast. Women paused, in their conversations to listen, some swaying gently to the music. The shelter itself seemed to breathe with new life, each note of Sienna's song adding another thread to the tapestry of healing being woven within its walls. As the final note resonated through the room, Sienna turned her face toward the window, letting the bright sunlight wash over her features. The storm that had brought her to Grady Memorial that night had given way to something beautiful, a song of restoration, ready to be heard. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.